It is part 2 of lesson 10. So what we have been doing so far today is setting up our Node Express API. I have uploaded it now to GitHub. Obviously, it's minus the node modules and minus my .env file. But if you missed anything, you can go and grab it. So I'll create a repository as well for the jobs client, the Angular app, which we're going to set up. But before we do, I want to look at your final assignment. So I'm going to go over it. So this assignment is, instead of a final exam, it's worth 25% of your overall grade. You're going to work in a group. And in our final class, which is 4 weeks from today, you are going to present a tutorial on some topic related to the mean stack. So basically, you're going to do some independent learning and teach the rest of the class something new that you've learned. So you'll submit on Blackboard by the Thursday night before class. So you'll submit one Git repository with a sample application, any presentation files, so any teaching, like if you have PowerPoint slides or any documentation you're going to use during your tutorial. And then just like in our Project Studio class, you're going to have a member contribution sheet. I think everybody knows how this works already. That if your group gets an 80% and everybody in the group contributes a 100% share, then you would each get 80%. If one group member only contributed half the amount of work they were supposed to, you would give them a 50% on the sheet, which would mean they would get 50% of your overall grade. So we're going to have a brief discussion now. I've got some suggestions posted of topics, which I will show you, and you can choose which topics interest you. I think there's 12 students. We're going to have 4 students per group. And the idea is you'll have 50 minutes. So our final class will go until 12 instead of till 11. Okay, so each group will get 50 minutes maximum to teach the rest of the class how to use some new feature or new technology. Maybe it's an Npm package, maybe it's something else. So I have some suggestions, which we'll look at briefly for topics, but there may be a topic that you are particularly interested in that you'd either like to know more about, or maybe it's something you've discovered during your assignment that you think it would be neat to share with the rest of the class. So as a group, you're going to give us a demo. We should be coding along and trying to get something working in 50 minutes. Doesn't mean we have to build an application from scratch. You might even provide a starter application on GitHub that the rest of us can download and work along with you. You might also add that feature right into one of the versions of the job tracker if you like. And you should anticipate some time for your classmates to ask questions, or you may need to pause to help them debug. So we'll look at the topic sign-up sheet in just a moment. So here's how you're marked on, your presentation itself, like keeping the class, doing an interesting presentation, your research. So do you understand the topic? And are you able to explain it to us? So there should be a role for everybody in the group during the tutorial. You're graded on the sample exercise you get us to try, and then you need to also submit a completed version, either the sample exercise or a more fully featured version. So think about an interesting way you can introduce your topic. You might show us a quick video. You might do you might present a case scenario. You might give us either at the beginning or after a little quiz using something like Kahoot. You could use a whiteboard, up to you. You could give us a poll or a survey. Think up a sample exercise that we can manage to complete in the time available, whether you need to provide a starter project that we're going to work with. And also think about what questions or problems are the rest of the students, and I will follow along just like the rest of the class. So when you were working through the code and getting it working, what things were unclear or what common problems did you have? And then what kind of support materials are you going to use? So I explained about the member contributions. I think everybody's already familiar with how this works. So here is the grading rubric, and it is 25% of your overall grade, subject to each individual's contribution. So these are divided evenly: your research, your presentation, your sample exercise, and your completed application. Now, before we get into kind of looking at the topics and discussing those, why would we what's the point of this exercise? There's a few reasons. I once had a student years ago say, I really object to this. I'm paying to be a student and to learn from you. You're paid to be the instructor, so you should teach the class, not us. Which isn't an entirely unfair point of view, but I think there are a number of benefits to having you guys each lead a tutorial in a group. Why would we have this assignment as opposed to a final exam? Okay, yeah, that's number one, Colton. Yep, teaching helps you. It's a really good way to demonstrate your knowledge. Absolutely, yep. Any other reasons you can think of that this might be a useful exercise for you to go through while you're still at school? Colton, I'll maybe just probe you a little more. Not only does it demonstrate your knowledge, but it does something more than that. What else does it do with your knowledge of a subject when not only are you using that knowledge, but you're trying to teach someone else? What effect does that have on your knowledge of a subject? Has anybody ever tried to teach anybody anything before? Matt says, it makes you refine what you know. That's right. So it's a way of consolidating your knowledge, right? In order to be able to do something, we have to have a certain level of knowledge and be able to explain it so that someone else can do it. That's right. You can't teach what you don't understand. And so if any of you have ever, even tutored informally a classmate, you'll know that it not only does it help them, but it helps consolidate and helps deepen your own knowledge of a topic when you have to teach it to someone else. As Matt says, it helps you refine and deepen your knowledge. So that's number one. You get to become a bit of an expert in something that interests you, something related to our technology stack. I also would suggest this is a useful skill for you, maybe not on day one when you go out into the work world as a junior designer or junior developer, but think about where you might be in your career 3 years from now, 5 years from now. Why would I want to give you the experience of teaching something to your peers? How might that help you? Your advanced class was a lot of teaching similar to this. Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know that, but that's good. So where's the value to you? Yeah, doing presentations. Yep, that's true. Let's look ahead 5 years down the road. Think about your ideal job, right? Think about what kind of work you'd like to be doing and where you're working. Exactly, Matt. If you're going to be a team lead, a senior developer, senior designer, maybe a project manager, right? You're going to be responsible for helping to train the junior staff that might work under you, right? If you're successful, you're going to get promoted. And there's going to be people who rely on you to help train them and provide guidance. You bring in somebody new, they don't know how you do things. Yeah, that's a really good point as well, Colton. Even in interviews, being able to explain concepts to someone else. And not only do we train, those things are very true, and not only do we often have to train junior people, who else do we often have to train on technology? Besides, yeah, our clients, right? We build a system, we need to show them how to use it. We build a web application, we build a dashboard, we build a mobile app. Ultimately, we're going to hand these tools over to our clients, just like you're going to do, for example, with the energy dashboard. So we need to show them how to use it. So being able to present our work, explain how things work, it's actually an important skill in a professional or designer or developer, right? We don't just work in a vacuum hidden away in a basement. So the point is, I'm not having you teach a class because I'm too lazy to teach. I love to teach. I just think this is a good exercise for you to go through to prepare you for some of these work experiences that you're likely to have as you move through your careers. Okay. So that's the goal. I also think this is more fun and less stressful than giving you a timed final exam. When I've given classes the choice in the past, they've always chosen, yes, we'd much rather teach the class for an hour as a group rather than write a final exam, which is why we remove the exams from this course. I think it's kind of a fun way to end your semester. Yeah, it can be a little bit stressful, but we know each other pretty well, right? You're not talking to a group of strangers. You guys have been working together for 2 years now, and we're a small group. Now, normally, unfortunately, I don't get this bonus. Normally, when I do this in class, my role not only is to be a student for this class, but I also always, my daughter's a great baker, so we always bake dessert and bring it into class. Oatmeal cookies or brownies or something else. She helps me. Unfortunately, I won't be able to bake because we're doing this online. Okay, but it is kind of I think it's a fun class. So you get a chance to be an expert for a little bit and to teach the class. you may have to bake yourself. So that'll be our last class. So it will be 3 hours because we're going to have 3 groups and each group will have 50 minutes. It goes by really quickly. It's really fast. So don't plan to teach too much because you also have to allow time for your explanation and time to answer questions and make time for debugging. Okay, so the actual demo exercise probably shouldn't be more than half the time you allocate. So I've got a link here. I will put it in the chat. And if you're watching the video, so if you can click on this OneDrive link, whoops, okay, why is that not available? Sorry. Bear with me, I will repost that link. We will try that link again. Okay, there you go. So I've proposed 5 topics. We only are going to choose 3 topics. And it doesn't have to be one of these. So if anybody has another suggestion, like, hey, there's something I'm really interested in, then we can add it to the list. So I've suggested file uploading in Node. We could look at unit testing. We could integrate PayPal. We could look at resetting a password through Passport or using JSON web tokens for authentication through an API service. So here's what I would like you to do. Go into the spreadsheet now, and I want you to add Well, first of all, if anybody has suggestions, if there's another topic that really interests you that you would like me to add to the list, please throw it into the chat and I will add it to the spreadsheet. That's number one. If you've got another suggestion, then we can certainly add it to the list. Okay, yeah, that would probably involve setting up with a service like SendGrid or Twilio, but we could do that. Yep. Thanks, Colton. Okay, here's what I'd like you to do. For those of you who are here in class, and if you're watching the video, you've got a couple days to express a preference for a topic, and if not, I will just make up the groups. So in the spreadsheet, beside your name, put a 1 and a 2 in front of the two topics that interest you the most. You can just edit the spreadsheet. Beside your name, we've got 6 possible topics. So put in a 1 into the cell with your first choice and a 2 into the cell with your second choice. So I will wind up making the groups. The students that aren't here, you do have a couple of days, but by Monday, I will make up the groups. So please edit the file in your browser and indicate which 2 topics interest you the most. Just put a 1 and a 2 in beside your name in the appropriate cell. Just pause the recording for a minute. Okay, so please make sure that you add your preferences. If you have no preference at all, that's fine, but I will start by Monday. I guess I need to send this out. I will make an announcement because I'm not sure until the groups are formed. So I'll just send out an announcement. So Monday is March 8th. So I'll send out an announcement as well. Okay. So we're going to go back now. We've set up our job tracker API. Now, all it does is read data right now. There's no create, there's no update, no delete. That's okay. We want to start to build the Angular front end. So what I'm going to do, I want to leave my server running here. So we're going to create a separate application. I don't want to close, so my server's running with NodeMon. I want this to keep running. But then I'm going to go to a new terminal window and use the Angular CLI to create the client application. And then I'm going to open up a new window in Visual Studio Code. So we're going to have 2 projects open simultaneously. We want to keep the Express server running in the back end, and then we want to start to build out our Angular front end. So in your terminal, you've probably got 1 window running here. So just add a second terminal window. And then I want to go outside. I don't want to build the Angular app inside here, so I want to go back up 1 folder. I'm going to start by typing cd ... to just go back to my root node folder. And then we're going to use the Angular CLI to build our jobs client app. So once I've gone outside of my server application, I'm going to run the command ng new, and this one is going to be called jobs client. So this will be the front end with all our HTML, CSS, and Angular. So type ng new jobs-client. Do I want Angular routing? We probably don't need it, but I will just say yes in case we do want it later. So I'll just type Y. Style sheet format, I just want plain CSS, which is the default. You can see it's highlighted in blue. So just hit enter. And this will create the client application. So again, I'm not closing the server. We still need the server running. So our server runs on port 3000. Our client will run on port 4200. Yes, you can say yes to Angular routing. And Chris, just hit enter for the CSS. So it will default to plain CSS. We're not using Sass or less. So I'm going to keep my server application running. And then I'm just going to jump back to my File Explorer for a minute here. I'll go back to my node folder. So here's the server, here's the client. So now what I want to do is open up my client application in Visual Studio Code. So I'll have two separate windows. We're probably not going to touch the server window again today. All we really want to do is be able to set up, if we can complete it, we want to be able to display, fetch data, the employer list from our API and display it in our Angular front end. And then that should give us time next week to add a form for adding, editing, adding and updating, as well as delete functionality. So here's my Angular application. This is just right out of the box with the Angular CLI. So to run this one, I'm going to open my terminal here. And we can type ng serve -o for open. And this is going to build and start the Angular server on port 4200, and the --o, it's also going to open the site in a new browser tab. So I'm inside my jobs client. We'll start the server and it pops open and it just gives us the main Angular homepage running on port 4200. So we've got both sites running simultaneously here. Right, here's our server, it's still running. We can call our API and get our JSON data. And our client, because they run on different ports, they can run at the same time. So what we're going to do, just load my job tracker for a moment. It's online. So we're going to kind of recreate this application. We're going to reskin our jobs client so it looks kind of like this one, although everything's going to happen on a single page. So we're going to start to customize. We're going to get rid of this home page. We're going to customize the look. So the first thing I want to do in my jobs client, number one, we'll go into our source. And in here, here's our index.html. So we can make a few changes in here. Number one, instead of saying jobs client, we'll say job tracker. We'll change the title. We also, I want to add Bootstrap right in here. We'll just use the CDN, the Content Delivery Network, for this. I don't need to download it locally. I'll just go and add the Bootstrap CDN link, which I'll put in the chat. So I'll just go to Get Bootstrap and download. And here are our links right here. Throw them in the chat. So I'm just going to copy the link to the Bootstrap CSS file and JavaScript bundle. I'll just dump those in here. Now there's also a custom style sheet that's here. It's empty, but let's link it in as well. And then we can copy the styles that we customized here, like things like our buttons, our yellow, our links. So we can copy these styles in as well. So I'm going to add a link to the style sheet. Custom styles. And then what I'm going to do is just go and copy all of the styles that we had put in our custom style sheet. I'm going to dump them in here because we added a bunch of classes. We won't use them all, but I've already got them up on GitHub. So here's the link inside of public and style sheets. This was called style.css. And I can even import that font as well. So here's the link to our styles. I don't know, we're going to use all these, but I'm just going to copy them, dump them in here. We may not even use a nav bar, really. We'll see if we do. But our links will be navy blue. We'll use our font. And I can also import that Google font as well into our index. I'm going to grab that as well. This is optional, but I may as well make it look good. So in our layout, I think I also, I had the Google fonts here. I'm going to copy those as well and keep them. I like them. So you could import it into the CSS. Whoops. Sorry, I grabbed one extra line there. Again, I'm just going to paste those right into my index.html. Now we won't see any changes here because this page has got a whole bunch of styles already hard-coded. We're not going to use this page. We're going to replace it in a minute. Okay, so I've added the Bootstrap content links from the content delivery network, added our own styles, which I just copied from our original job tracker. We've got kind of our navy and yellow color scheme. And then I've added my Google font. So what we want to do is we want to create our own employer controller, our own employer component, which will come with an employer, kind of an empty employer HTML page. And then we can start building out that page so that it can make a call to our backend API. So we can fetch the list of employers, but instead of showing them as raw JSON, like this, we can read and loop over and format our list nicely inside of our Angular application. We should be able to get this working. So in the Angular app, I'm going to go back to my terminal. I want to leave this server running here, so I'm not going to do anything with my existing terminal window because my service is running. I'm going to create a new terminal window, and we're going to use one of the Angular commands, just like we did last week. We're going to generate a new component. But I don't want to do it here in the root. I want my component to go inside of the source app, and I'm actually going to make a folder for the component first. So in my File Explorer under Source and App, I'm going to right-click and make a new folder called Components. We're going to make a component, and then we're going to make a service. So I'm going to make both those folders now. So I'm now under App, I've got a subfolder called Components. I'm going to right-click my app folder again and make another subfolder called Services. So I'm separating the components that interact with the front end from the services that handle the calls to our API server. Okay, so there you can see the folder tree. Under Source and App, two new folders, one called Components and one called Services. And then we want to generate an employer component in here. So in my new terminal window, we're going to change directories, cd source, so src/app/components. So I'm inside my components directory now. It's empty. And we're going to use an Angular command to build a new component. So ng generate, made that mistake last week, ng generate component, and we will call it employer employer.component. So there's our command. So now inside of my components folder, we get a series of files. We get a TypeScript file that's going to handle where we're going to write our logic. Our HTML file, this is our view, where we're going to add all our HTML and our Angular directives. The CSS we don't need because we're using the two global style sheets, our styles and Bootstrap. So this file we can actually get rid of. We don't need a specific CSS. I'm just going to delete that file. So here's what it says right now. And we're just going to remove in our employer component. Oh, whoops, you know what? I'm going to redo this. It already gives it the name of component. Sorry, I'm going to redo it. I'm just going to delete those files for a minute. Redo. My bad. Sorry. We're going to run it again. With ng generate component. We'll just call it employer. It will automatically give it a suffix of .com. Just ng generate component employer is sufficient. There, this employer.component I'm going to get rid of. So there's 4 files. Again, I'm going to remove the CSS. And now we'll get rid of this style URLs property. It doesn't need its own CSS file. We have a global style sheet and Bootstrap. So here's our component, and our page just says employer works. So now we want to change our application so that our home page is this page instead. We don't want it to load right now the startup page. If we go to index, right, it's loading our app component, which loads app component.html. So this template page, we played around with it a bit last week. So we need to make 2 changes so when our application loads, instead of showing this page, I'll clean it up. We want it to show our employer. So on index.html, we're going to change the app root tag. We did this last week. We're going to change it to app employer. So we want to show the employer component here instead. Then we've got to make a couple of other changes down in our main Angular configuration, which is here under app.module.ts. So a couple things. It's still got a reference to that old one on line 6. Well, we deleted that, so I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to get rid of it in the declarations as well. In order to change the starting component, and again, we did this last week, we're going to change the Bootstrap, the startup, from app component to employer component. And so I got rid of that reference to my first failed attempt. And I've changed the Bootstrap. So if I go back to the browser and look at our Angular application, I should just get a white page that says, with Bootstrap, that says employer works. There shouldn't be anything else there. You can see it's using our font. So we don't need that template page that Angular gives us. We're going to work with our own page. So we can change this heading for starters. If we go to our employer component, Let's take out what's there. Let's put on a main tag. And we can put in an H1, just job tracker. Okay, so now we get a heading. There's no nav bar right now. It's okay because users aren't really navigating anywhere. We'll just put it on a title here. So we've got to do a few things. Now, what we want to do on this page under our heading is we want to display all the data from our API. We want to show all the employers. Something like this, slightly different format, but we want to show them here. Maybe I'll actually just change the heading to say employers. So we'll need a loop in our view. We'll need some logic in the component. And then we need one more thing, which is we need a service. We said earlier, what does a service do? Right? A service, this is the bridge between the component and view front end and our API server on the back end. So we're going to create that service, and then we'll write the code in the component and then the code in the view lastly. So I'm going to come back down to my terminal. I've still got this second window open inside my components directory. I want to leave this folder, go out of it, and go into the services directory and generate an Angular service. So I'm going to type cd ... This takes me out of the components folder, and now we want to use Angular to generate a service, also called also called employer. So the service will be that bridge that connects our Angular application to our node server. It will make the HTTP calls and return JSON. Fetch the JSON that's returned from our API. So we're going to run ng generate service employer. Oh my God, I did it in the wrong place. Sorry. I'm going to delete those again. So it put them in the app folder. I meant to go in the services folder. I'm going to delete those two files. I need to do cd services first. We're going to go into the services folder, and then I'll run that command again. ng generate service employer, and you can see I'm inside of the services folder now. It's going to build those in here inside my services folder. Now here. And then I'm going to open up the Angular service. So this is the file that's going to make calls to the API. So this is defined as injectable, meaning our component will require an instance of the service. It's injected or sent to the component at runtime. So this will allow our component to grab our service when our application is running. But we're going to write out our service first. So we're going to need to import Angular's HTTP client So we need this library because it will make our get, post, put, delete requests to our server. We also have to say when our service gets created, we need to have access to this HTTP client. So this is going to be a parameter. Whenever the service is created, it's got to use an instance of this library. So now we're going to write a method that can call our node server. So we'll write a method called getEmployers. And this is going to So we're going to use HTTP, and you can see the methods here. This is going to be a GET request. Later on, next week, we'll use POST for creating, PUT for updating, and delete, obviously, for deleting. Now, just for now, for simplicity, we'll change this later. We're just going to hard code in the URL. So it makes a GET request to our API. We know this method returns JSON, so this should give us a JSON object. Call this URL, this is what we get. We get a bunch of employer documents in JSON format. So we're calling our server here. And it returns, it will send back the JSON to the component. So next week, we'll look at moving this URL to an environment file. We shouldn't really be hard coding it because this won't work if we deploy to the server. We'll just do it this way for today. So now we want to go to our component and say whenever we've got this init method, ng on init, it's invoked immediately when this component is activated. So as soon as the user goes here, we want our component to call our service and go fetch the data. And we want the data to load automatically, just like it does here. As soon as we load, it goes and fetches the data. So we're going to import our service. We're going to import the employer service, and we're providing it as a dependency. So whenever our component gets called, it needs to use our service. So we're going to create a service. So whenever our component is created, it must use our service because our service will talk to our API in the backend. We'll create a list of employers that are just defined as any data type. This will represent the JSON that we get from our service. we'll create a get employer method, which doesn't return anything, it's void. We'll say this.service. So we can call our get employers method here. And when we call it, we have a callback. And we will subscribe. We're going to wait for some kind of response. So we're going to put that response into a local variable called employers. This will allow us to loop through and display the employer data in our HTML. And lastly, whenever our component is initialized, we want to start this query chain. When our component is initialized, it calls our get method. Our get method calls the get method in our service. Our service calls our backend API, and which fetches the data from MongoDB. So there is kind of a long chain of the data moving through all our layers. Now we're almost at the point we can test this. So we'll just do this really simply in our HTML. We'll try it out. I need about 5-10 more minutes, and then we should be able to at least display some data. We can add formatting and stuff next week. So in here, in the employer, we'll just add a UL for now. We'll keep it really simple. And then we'll add an LI. We'll use star ng4. We used this last week, so this is going to loop through let employer of employers. So our component has an employer's property. We are filling it with our response. So now we should be able to loop through and use our Angular syntax to put out employer We'll see if we can render the employer name this way. So we'll do much more with this next week, but let's see what happens. Go back to the browser. Okay, get employers does not exist on our service. That's interesting. Looks like we have, I know what we're missing. We have to do a little configuration, more configuration in our app module. So we have not referenced our service here. So we need to import our employer service and add it to the list of providers. Injectable objects that are available to components. So we need to provide here our employer service. We also need to add the HTTP client module. Which would go in our list of inputs. So I've added lines 7 and 8, 18 and 20. Okay, we're still getting a couple errors. Okay, that we can fix. Sorry, in our component. Let's just see. We're almost there. Starts. What's it telling us? Why does it say get employers doesn't exist? Of course it exists. Got our service. Everything looks pretty good to me. We've got our client. Our service is injectable, so it can be used. Got our injectable keyword, so that's good. There is something else we have to do, but I'm just going to look at my console. I wouldn't think we'd have to do this, but let's just try it. Component. Okay, well, we've got more to do with this. Going a little longer than I thought. There's something else we'll have to configure in order to complete it. So I think what we'll do, I'm sure I'm missing something small, which I'll figure out after I take a minute to think about it. But what we'll do, I will upload, Mike, did I save my changes? That's a good question. I wonder if I did. Oh, okay, right. So there's nothing wrong with the code. Thank you, Mike. But notice it doesn't show up. The code is correct. Mike, you're a genius. Gold star. I just hadn't hit save. So there's no error, but there's no data showing up, right? Our list is empty, and I'll show you why. Give me 5 more minutes, and we'll just get the data to show up. When I refresh, notice the error. So here, we get a bunch of 200 responses, but we get this, blocked. When it makes so it's trying to call localhost 3000, right? It's trying, but we get this, missing allowing origin, cores missing allowing origin. Anybody have any idea what the heck this means? So it's making a GET request. So there's data here, but it says response body is not available to scripts. What does CORS mean? Anybody heard of CORS before? CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. So why would it be blocking our request here? So it has the data, we can see it in the console, but it won't render in the page. This is a security measure. Why do you suppose our request is being blocked? So when I go here directly, it's fine. But why do we get this cross-origin resource sharing error when we request it from a different port or different domain? This is a built-in security feature that says, okay, you can, yeah, exactly, Colton. So you can't access it from an external link. So we can go here directly, but by default, our API doesn't grant access to localhost 4200. So we want to make a change in our server application to allow for this. There's an Npm package we can actually use to allow not any CORS request, but to allow requests only from localhost 4200. I'm just going to go back to the server app for a minute. We'll add a few lines of code here, and then this should work. So in my environment file, I'm going to add a client URL of localhost 4200. Okay, so we're explicitly going to allow cross-origin requests if they come from our client app. And again, when we deploy this to Heroku, we'll use it won't be a local link, it'll be a live URL. So no other client domains can request the data, only local host 4200. And then in the server app, I'm going to go back to the terminal. I'm going to create a new terminal window, and we're going to install an Npm package called CORS. Npm CORS. So I'm going to install CORS, and then in app.js, we're going to say enable CORS cross-origin resource sharing requests as long as those requests come from our client URL. So install the CORS package, and then we'll just jump over to app.js. We've got to add a few lines here, and this should fix everything. I'm going to add it up here to our list of imports. And then after this line, after we've enabled the environment, so here, we're going to enable CORS. So we'll say app.use, we're going to use CORS, cross-origin resource sharing. And we're going to set our origin we will allow requests from our client URL, and we're going to allow these methods: get, post, put, delete, head, and options. So these types of requests, if they come from the URL, we're going to allow them. So I'm just going to save that change. Now I should be able to go back to the Angular app and our employers should show up, or this should fix our CORS error. So I'm going to save my change, and I'll maybe just stop and restart. So we've required CORS. We've set our client URL in the environment file. I'm just going to stop it and restart it. Connected. Okay, we've installed CORS. Just going to make sure we've configured it properly. There is another way to do it, but this should do it for us. I'm just going to stop and restart my Angular app one time. And then I think we'll call it a day. We're going to resume next week. So I'm just going to stop. Again, run ng-serve in the client. I think our data should load here. But we're still getting our CORS error. Okay, there is another way to do it. This was the simpler option for allowing our CORS. Should allow get. All right, we will pause here. I'm going to upload everything. There is a workaround for our CORS, but we've already, I think, gone over time today. So I'm going to pause here and we will resume next week. I'll upload both applications to GitHub.